Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. Carrying on the conversation from the previous episode about micro events and AI, we get a chance to expand on that topic with webinar panelist Dan Bolton, the head of marketing at wealth.com. Dan shares insights on how he and his team effectively plan and execute micro events, how they and other event planners like you can balance large and small events, and the role of AI in enhancing your event planning. We also touch on the power of hospitality in executing your next amazing event experience. Welcome back. We're here with another episode of Event Experience, and the event experience I'm bringing you today is the head of marketing at wealth.com, where he leads initiatives that elevate the company's brand, accelerate demand generation, and position wealth.com as the category leader in estate planning and wealth technology. I don't know if I've ever heard of wealth technology, but I guess we all work with that all the time. Dan has been named a 2024 Next Gen Rising Star by CityWire, 2025 Rising Star by Investment News, and a finalist for the 2025 CMO of the Year at the Think Advisor Luminary Awards. I'm probably going to have to come back and we'll have to have him back onto it. See if he won that, and he's still the rising star, but it sounds like he's on a good trend. But I'm happy to welcome Dan Bolton to the podcast. Thanks, Dan, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm honored to be here and excited.
Well, let us get into the get to know you questions. There's going to be a familiar one in here, but then there's a couple new ones. A familiar one as far as like what I asked you in the webinar. But Dan, when you are spending a whole day out on your feet at an event, what are your go-to on the ground shoes to wear?
Same answer as the webinar. On clouds, specifically yes. The Roger collection, because what you can do is you can be on your feet all day long running around the trade show. And then if there's a happy hour that you're about to miss, you can still put on that sort of sports coat, keep the shoes on, transition, and sort of look somewhat put together.
That's very important. You need to have those kind of at least dual or multi-purpose shoes that you can get you and be like, I can be casual, but I can also be dressy and yes. Anything in between and be comfortable. Because those feet matter, especially on hour 14. Is there anything that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days that you cannot put down? And it doesn't have to be events related.
Yeah. Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Highly recommend that. And that's sort of, I would say the book is just a reminder that structure and imagination can coexist. And on music, I've been just listening to a lot of Red Clay Strays, just enjoying what they're doing. And then for watching, having a 2-year-old, I think I've seen every Bluey episode 3 times now. And so that between Bluey, between Peppa Pig, there's not a lot of time for regular programming, but that's yes. My expertise now.
And pertinent. But those kids programs are great too, because then you're like, oh, that's a good lesson. I could probably use that. In fact, I might refer to that later with my team or something like that. That's so helpful. But mine were, I think it was Dora the Explorer.
That's a good one.
Just all the time. And Thomas the Train Engine.
That's a good one too.
That's right. Always remember the phrase confusion and delay. And I quote that often. I know nobody around me knows what I'm quoting. And I'm like, that's okay. I'm really excited to have Dan here because he's actually, I get to talk to him. This is the second time I've talked to him because he's been on a Bizzabo webinar. But before we get into that, Dan, I so skated over your title and accolades and stuff like that. There's a lot more to Dan Bolton that we want to know about. So I'm going to toss it back over to you briefly. Tell us a little bit more about your world at wealth.com, your world generally. Like, who is Dan Bolton? And tell us more about him.
First of all, head of marketing at wealth.com. And so like you mentioned, we're the leading digital estate planning platform for financial institutions. And the role that encompasses is, I would say, is turning the complexities of estate planning and making it feel approachable, making it feel human and scalable for our clients. And the team that we have is terrific on the marketing side. So everything from comms, event, demand gen, creative, video, just sort of that whole aspect of marketing. we like to keep it in-house and do it all ourselves. And so we've got some great rock stars on the team. Outside of work, I love to run. And so I'm always trying to figure out the next race or event that I can run at. And we have two beautiful little kids. One's 2 years old and one is 3 months old. And so if you hear them in the background, just one of the perks of working from home, you may hear a scream or a toy thrown at the wall, that kind of thing. Just disregard it. Just know that's life right now.
I think we'll embrace it, because who can't relate with this? I mean, long ago, do you all remember the days when we had that BBC interview where the man is sitting there and his kid, I will never forget his little toddler rolling in, just coming on in with the walker and stuff. And then they were trying to whisk him away. But no, that is behind us. We're all in real life. And yeah, bring it on. If we get a child kind of entering the frame, I think that would be hilarious and awesome. And
it is every day now. So yes, just be prepared.
We are. I shut my door so my cat's not going to be joining me. So he's going to be upset about it too. That's fine. You said two things there too that I love having people on who are good and smart at things that I cannot relate to. One is like wealth management, and you're talking about like just making wealth easy to understand and kind of adopt and embrace. And I'm like, okay, that's not me. I hear the word wealth. I'm like, cool. What's that? I hope I know what that is someday. But it sounds like y'all are the perfect people to make it approachable and everything like that. And then also running, I like to use a quote from the movie Real Genius. Y'all can look that up. It's an old Val Kilmer film, but he says he only runs when chased, and that's me. So I admire you for being a runner as well. Again, not a world I'm familiar with, but our listeners are, so that's cool.
I can respect it. Totally.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you being like, okay, you do you, I'll do me. That's great. I mentioned earlier that we are having you back. This is the second time you and I have an opportunity to talk to each other, because you're encoring your presence that you were appearing on our recent webinar, Winning with Micro Events in an AI First World. Webinars feature, and everybody knows this, webinars feature multiple panelists. They're often the time is compressed because I have to dig into topics. But this episode is our chance to give you more space to expound, educate, and inspire us about this thing called micro events. Kicking that off then, first up, I'd like to ask you about your general professional philosophy about micro events and how they figure into the event strategy for brands in the industry. What do you think about micro events? What's your approach?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for that webinar last week. And I would encourage everybody to go check it out. It was really helpful, and I learned from the other panelists on there to implement some things on my own. Going back to micro events, I believe that they're the modern marketer's secret weapon. They're intimate, they're targeted, they're far more measurable than traditional conferences. And for us and how we deploy that, it's not about volume, it's more about depth. So a dinner of 20 high value prospects is much more valuable for us, and the interaction is much more real than a booth conversation with 2,000 people and who forget your name when they go to the next aisle. And so I've chatted with a few different folks, and they'll say something along the lines of like, that's great that you all do that, but it would never work for our ICP or our audience, who we serve, who we sell to. And you think like, okay, your customer base may naturally gravitate towards more introverted activities, and inviting them to events may not be the best thing. You may serve software engineers or accountants or actuaries, those kind of folks that may be a little bit more tricky to get to a big conference. And I would say that the inverse is actually true. These type of customers, and if that's a hesitation of yours, they prefer depth over hype. And so an exclusive experience that's much more intimate, tailored to them, is going to be more attractive, because otherwise they're committing to attend a 5,000 person event. And so this is where micro events, those targeted smaller events, win. The more technical, the more, I'll say it, more boring your industry that you operate in, the better targeted events perform. And so it's really become a big part of our strategy. So we see them not as replacements, but complements to what we do. And so we're still going to put on the big conference. We're still going to go to all these different trade shows throughout the year. But at the same time, we're hosting these smaller, intimate gatherings to line up our event and smooth out sort of that calendar.
You bring up a great point there too. Everybody's different. I mean, look, you and I can kind of like label each other. Actually, let's label each other really quick. If you had extrovert and introvert and anywhere in between, where would you kind of position yourself on that spectrum?
Oh, I think you're hosting the podcast. You hosted the webinar. Like, I would say you are extroverted, but you appreciate sort of the intimate, targeted kind of experiential elements.
Right. And then what about yourself? Like, would you call yourself like an extrovert, or do you feel like you're a little bit more to the introverted side, or mishmash or mash up of the two?
I lean more towards extrovert. I enjoy, working from home, like I'm always thinking about when do I get to see people next? Like I just want to go see people. During COVID, I was going stir crazy. And so I'll just go to like the barbershop once a week because I wanted to talk to somebody. And it's just like, all right, here's the hair guy. He's going to talk to me and I'll get my 30 minutes to chat with him.
It's a good point to bring up. I would hazard to say, and y'all, if you've listened to the show, I think we've talked about this particular topic or aspect of people's personalities. Talk about attendees, but talking about event planners themselves and marketers, sometimes you do tend to be more of an extrovert because sometimes that involves, hey, I need to be on a video, or I need to help run a webinar or host a podcast or appear on a podcast or anything like that, or at least say, yeah, I'll write a blog and my name will be on it and people will see it, versus introverts. And I really appreciate the point you made there too, where especially if it's like more of a technical audience or even something you might consider maybe a drier topic or, industry, that a micro event can be more appealing. Because think about it, like maybe that person doesn't want to go to a 15,000 attendee event and get lost and there's sensory stuff going on. They feel like, oh, I feel alone, even though I'm in the midst of all this. Whereas there's actually less pressure to go to a micro event because it's like, yeah, well, that's a confined, succinct amount of people, not likely to get overwhelmed there. And I'll come away not feeling alone. Like I'll have a good conversation or two and relate to somebody. So I love that you pointed that out because it can be easy to want to do the big ones, the big ticket events where there's tons of people and get the big vanity registration numbers and obviously the money if you're charging and stuff like that. And we'll probably get into this a little bit later in this interview, using what you said, going for the depth, which can matter a lot to people. And by the way, I love that you mentioned depth too. It's a little bit of a sports reference and I'm all excited. Hockey just started again. So I can definitely relate to the whole depth part of it. It's like, that's a meaningful adjective to use there. You also said, and this gets into my next question, you said you're not replacing bigger events, but you're adding on, you're supporting, supplementing those with micro events. I don't know if you've from your viewpoint of other event planners, do you find that event planners are replacing larger events and kind of swapping in micro events, or do they tend more to be adding micro events onto their big events like you have done? We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. Hey, event professionals, do you want to hear more from the industry's top event experience leaders? Don't miss out on future episodes of the Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo. Hit subscribe, drop us a review, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. The Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo, where events come to life. We're back with Dan Bolton and any of our podcast fans who are about to plan their first micro event.
I would say that they're adding and not wholesale just canceling big events, because big flagship events, those still matter for brand reach and visibility. It's much easier to get a reporter on site at a big conference than it is a small dinner. But micro events are where those conversations happen. And so they complement each other, in my opinion, because a big event creates energy, it creates buzz, it creates credibility. You can get X number of people in a room at one time. But for us, we'll sponsor those big events, or we'll put on our own event. Then we'll host an exclusive dinner or a roundtable for those key decision makers that we're looking to interact with. And so that's where the deals are born. There's a ratio. I don't know what the ratio is for every industry, but I would say something like for every big event that you do, you ought to have 2 to 3 other smaller events to complement alongside of it. Because from our industry, there's not big events. every month. There's seasonality to the planning. And so for us, like July and August, along with November a bit, they're pretty dead in terms of big industry trade shows. And so what we'll do is we just refer to it as making our own magic. And we're going to host those dinners, those lunches, those smaller events that we can just keep that momentum going.
Yeah. Well, and that's really important what you brought up there too. We were just talking offline before we started recording even about it. September is a hugely busy month for event planners because there's all kinds of events going on. IMEX is happening as we speak in Las Vegas, which that's IMEX America. And then there's IMEX Frankfurt that happens on the other half of the calendar. But events, especially for our industry, the events industry, are happening all the time, it feels like, or at least most of the year. But that's not every brand. That's not every industry. You know, you talk about wealth, you talk about financial, you talk about taxes, you know, tax season and stuff. I would be willing to bet nobody's putting on a big conference for tax accountants right around April because,
100%.
sorry, they're busy preparing people's taxes. And so, yeah, but that's super. I love that relevancy there too. And that feels like too, like you're focusing on what's good for you to say, yeah, a 2 to 3 micro event for a big event we do, but it's seasonal. And maybe that doesn't have to be the ratio or the equation, if you will, for someone who's in a different industry that might have a few more often touch points throughout the year, right?
That's exactly it.
There might have been a groan as people are listening and they realize that they're the event planner who is like, yeah, we're not replacing our big events with micro events, we're adding them. And I know we'll, at the end of this episode, you know, we'll prompt y'all to subscribe and follow us on social, but we would love to hear you let us know, you know, how's that going for you? Because, did you get more budget? Hopefully, did you get more team resources to make that happen? And with that, let's imagine for any of our listeners who have not yet done a micro event, but they know it's coming. They know, okay, I'm going to have to do one. I know it at some point, whether I've already been tasked with it or I know it's coming. If you're an event planner or field marketer who is going to be planning a micro event for the first time, what's your advice for making sure they set themselves up for success for that first time?
Yeah, I would say you've got to start with the clarity of mission before you get into any of the logistics, before you figure out venue, budget, anything like that. Figure out the why behind it. So are you looking for a single outcome? Is that outcome to launch a new product, to introduce yourself to new prospects, to deepen relationships, to move deals forward? There's a variety of reasons why you could host an event, but knowing that why is deeply important. And then once you have the why, then it's sort of like that waterfall effect of like, okay, let's start figuring out guest list. And then based on that guest list, let's figure out venue, let's figure out format, tone, messaging, structure of the overall event. And then I would also say, keep in mind, like the follow-up after you have the event is just as important. The 24 hours after the event is critical because what are you messaging afterwards? If you're just saying, hey, thanks so much for attending, you sort of put a stop on that relationship versus if you open up the dialogue a bit. If the email that you send out is like, let's keep the conversation going. Here's some other things that we're doing. Here's some other activations or events coming up. Here's some helpful resources. You want to keep on adding because on those emails, I sort of look at it like a scale. Like, is it a transactional or is it a relational email? And we often just default to like, okay, post-con, post-event email, transactional. We're going to ask them to fill out a survey. But in reality, it should be weighted much more heavily on the relational side. Like, how are you keeping that engagement going?
That's super important. I think it can be, look, I think we've all got like places where, ooh, I'm going to plan a micro event. Let's go to this restaurant because, you know, it's so cool. But that's not the place to start. The place to start is like, yeah, but what do we want the outcome to be like? And that gets you into like, what do you want the environment to be like? Is it going to be super noisy or is it going to be quiet? Will you be able to afford your attendees to be able to say, hey, can you do like little breakaways where you have time and, you know, space to have a quieter conversation, just 2 or 3 people versus all crammed into a room and you have to sit at the same table and everybody at the table is going to hear what you say all the time. I mean, it really does come down to being very important. Like, okay, yeah, what is the outcome you want? Because then, yeah, choosing that venue is going to directly impact if you get that outcome. And it's not like that's not true for a larger event, right? Like a larger venue, if you're doing a larger thing. But I mean, sometimes we can just default, well, that's a conference center, that's a hotel, hotel conference rooms or a convention center or trade show floor or whatever. That can feel very run of the mill. But when you're talking about these private events, and I wanted to ask a follow-up question with that too, does that really require then that you need to have like some local relationships and knowledge of where to utilize and vendors to utilize, et cetera, for a micro event, right?
Yeah, I mean, micro events are a great jumping off point. So someone may be listening and they're like, we don't do any events right now. And we're just trying to figure out what we do. And the temptation is like, okay, let's go big. Let's have a big conference kind of thing. I would say that's probably as far away from the idea that you should have. You should start with those micro events. You should start with the areas that you're familiar with. And then you build up because we all report to somebody. We all have a boss in one way or another that's asking about metrics or goals behind it. How did this perform? What did it do for the business? Micro events are so much easier to report on. So much easier to report on versus you do this big conference. You're just adding in layers of complexity. And on that local note, absolutely. Like for us, I'm in Atlanta, and one of the first micro events that we did was renting out a suite at the Braves game earlier this year here. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I'm familiar with the area. I know what's going to be successful or be well received by the audience. And so with that, it's just, where are you based? Do you have a headquarters base somewhere? You can have the micro event at your office. If you have a great office space or great restaurant, or if you have a sales team, they're primarily located in Los Angeles, talk to them and figure out what works best there.
Makes a ton of sense. This actually segues nicely into my next question, because we talked about bandwidth a little bit, and the tendency now is probably, we're not going to swap out larger events and replace them with a micro event, but instead we're going to add micro events. Okay. Well, you're adding that on to what your team, or you might be a solo event planner, what you're already doing. Hopefully get more budget, hopefully get more resource. But you already know you've been tasked to do more with the same and maybe not enough sometimes. Great if you've got enough. That's awesome. Go with that. Teach us your ways. We all want to know the secret. But this brings us to the question of AI, because I know we're all feeling the pressure to use it. For those of you who are listening or watching and haven't used it yet, you're in good company. There are some people who haven't done it yet, and that's fine. And there can be all kinds of reasons for why you haven't started using it. But I would love to touch on that expectation, or even just the demand that we all incorporated into our work. Let's add AI then into that micro events mixture. I'd love to learn, how do you and your team use AI to help you execute micro events?
Yeah, I approach this from a bit of a different angle, because earlier this year, our CEO, we had an all hands, and he mandated you have to use AI in your role. Regardless of role, you have to use it. And in fact, it's going to be in your end of year performance review. A question will be about your AI usage. And so that really lit a fire, I would say, under all of this. And so one of the first things is like, okay, team, you all now have ChatGPT licenses. Team, we need to start creating some GPTs. We need to start utilizing AI, figure out what's working, how you can improve your role that way. On the event side, sort of putting pen to paper, there's so many use cases, but I mean, some primary ones would be analyze attendee data, segment out which areas of the company, or which area of the country, have the biggest concentration of customers. And can you recommend venues? Can you create runs of show? Can you create an ideal event experience based on this persona? And then even post-event, it's sort of that intelligence layer that would take a long time versus you reading through every single feedback. You can input all that feedback in there and have it summarized, surface up insights, and then even generate personalized follow-up messages. If somebody had a poor experience, it's just like, okay, how do I massage this message based on their feedback? And it just lets our team spend less time on sort of spreadsheet work, as I call it, and more time on sort of creating those experiences, hearing all that feedback, being able to sort of consolidate it and build out a really good program. And then even separately, like Bizzabo is a good example, because you all have that helpful AI help center chatbot feature. And so it's embedded in the platform. And I know we didn't talk about this, but I'm going to promo it because I'll be able to go in if I'm looking for something. I'm not quite sure where it lives in that menu bar. I can just search it. It'll link directly to it, and it just saves time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd be curious to know who else who's listening has gotten that same or similar mandate from leadership to be like, or even just like your own team where it's like, you guys, we got to be using this. Come on. Or to make it such a point. And honestly, I feel like your leadership did you a good service there to mandate that. It really does force you to say, at least learn what it does and know what it does. And because y'all, I don't know what the future holds for AI. I don't think I know we talk a lot about AI already on this podcast, as it pertains to events and event planners. But nobody here has a crystal ball and knows what's going to happen with it in a year or 5 years or whatever. We're all hoping it's not going to be Terminator, I think it's safe to say, taking Sarah Connor's warnings, but we just don't know. But what we do know is that everybody's asking about it. And again, it's a demand by every industry just about to say, well, what are you doing to maximize your time and use it as a resource and save yourself time and do things faster, hopefully better. So your leadership really is enforcing that you're going to have some experience with it, which is better than not having any experience at all and just not knowing. So, but it's great. I like that you gave some examples too that, here's ways you can use it, analysis, do that kind of heavy lifting. Your kids agree that.
Did you hear it?
I did. No.
Oh, there cool. It is.
That's okay. But your kids are probably, they're going to have to deal with AI too, right out the gate as they start going to school, but no, it's super important. It's an aspect of everybody's industry we're not going to get away from. And so I appreciate your insights into how we can use it and, maybe save ourselves some time and still have that human factor, which I think you make sure that you add a great insight into. Finally, easiest answer of all, where can our listeners find and follow you online?
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me, add me on LinkedIn. Just search Dan Bolton, wealth.com in the LinkedIn search bar, and I should come up pretty close to the top.
Dan invites us all to skill ourselves up by letting ourselves out of our own microcosms and into the wider world.
First, you've got to expand your horizons. Travel, go to amazing concerts, try really great food. Events are so many things wrapped up in one. You've got the production element, you've got the planning, you've got location, you've got food, and it only serves you as the event planner to be well-versed in what good looks like. Because your attendees will be. They will have gone to that concert. They will have gone and they compare it to what their experience at your event. And so I tell our team, don't look at what others in our industry are doing. Don't look at our competition. Don't look at what they're doing. Don't bother yourself with that. Look at what the best are doing in their respective fields. Go to that Taylor Swift concert and see, how does she make the experience? How does she make the atmosphere? Like what's the AV look like? How do they manage people flowing at high volume, sort of like choke points throughout the venue? And then it's just, I joke with my wife because I'm the worst person to go to concerts with, because I like to sit sort of to the side of the stage because I want to see what's going on backstage. I want to see what's going on at the front. I want to sort of see how the audience is reacting. And we just went to a Coldplay concert, and sure enough, we're sitting on the side, and I'm just geeking out over how they're running it behind the scenes, how they transition on the stage, what that all looks like. But both understand the back end and the front end are important. Even at restaurants, like if there's a seat that's close to the kitchen, I would love that, because I'd like to see how the staff, they're interacting, how they serve, how they bring it out. And then if I can add one more, I would say never underestimate the power of hospitality. The small touches, the name cards, the handwritten notes, remembering someone's favorite drink. Those are the things that turn those events into relationships. And so something that we'll do for our events is we always buy some extra toy sets. So these are Legos, these are Barbies, just random. They're not expensive, $15, $20 each, but we'll get a handful of them because sure enough, we will interact with an attendee, and that attendee will say something like, I hate that my kids couldn't come, or my kids are sending me pictures of what they're doing. And we want that attendee to go home as a hero. And it's just, okay, hold on 1 second. Let's go grab something. And we come back and we make him or her a hero. And it's like, hey, give this to your kids. Let them know that you're thinking about them. And also this saves you a trip from your gift shop on bringing something back home.
Thanks again to Dan Bolton for joining us on Event Experience. And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.